Today's subject is a woman whose fearless wit lit up New York cabarets, whose voice carried from Broadway stages to sold-out arenas, and whose face became unforgettable on both the silver screen and television specials. Bette Midler. She was the firecracker who turned bawdy nightclub sets into Grammy-winning albums, the actress who could break your heart in Beaches and steal a scene in Hocus Pocus, the Broadway star who brought down the house in Hello, Dolly. But behind the thunderous applause, record deals, and critical acclaim, her life and career were anything but smooth. There were battles with burnout, public doubts after box, office disappointments, and relentless tabloid whispers about her marriage and personal choices, moments when the weight of fame threatened to crush the spark that made her unforgettable. Beyond the headlines and the drama, there was a quieter chapter where fame faded into the background and motherhood took center stage. Because when the crowds went home and the stages went dark, Bette Midler was simply mom, and that's where another story begins. The story of the child who grew up watching a legend while carving out a life of her own. Sophie von Hasselberg was born in 1986. Arriving in a world already shaped by her mother's fame, Bette Midler at that time was touring, recording, and appearing on screens across America. Yet every flight and every show came with the pull of a new baby at home. Sophie's earliest memories were filled with music and movement, garment bags in the hallway, scripts on the kitchen counter, and phone calls that interrupted bedtime stories. Even as a toddler, she sensed contrasts, her mother stepping through the door glowing with applause. Then moments later, sitting quietly, shoes off, staring into space with exhaustion. Family life often felt like an extension of the stage, where laughter and creativity thrived, but where schedules and pressure never stopped. Sophie grew up watching her mother switch between two roles with remarkable speed, one for the world and one for the family. And even at that young age, she felt the weight behind the smile. Those first years imprinted on her the idea that fame was bright but heavy, and that strength was built not on applause, but on returning home despite it all. By the early 1990s, Sophie was starting school, and the household energy shifted as Bette Midler faced the sharp backlash from her film Stella in 1990. Headlines questioned her choices, and Sophie, though still very young, noticed the tension in late-night conversations and the way her mother held the newspapers a little too long. At school, classmates sometimes repeated things they overheard at home, asking why people were saying her mom's movie was bad. Sophie didn't fully understand, but she felt protective and confused, sensing that the world beyond their door could be cruel. Evenings were quieter. Bette would sit with Sophie, brushing her hair, and softly explain that not everyone likes everything you do, and that's all right. Those moments planted early lessons about resilience. While other children's parents went unnoticed, Sophie's was in every magazine, and with that came a unique kind of growing up one, where she learned quickly that love for family mattered more than public opinion, and that even heroes have days when the world seems unkind. By the mid to late 1990s, Sophie was entering her teenage years, and the shadows of fame felt closer than ever. Bette Midler was still celebrated for her music, but faced uneven success with films like That Old Feeling and Isn't She Great? And tabloids eagerly dissected her every move. At school, Sophie sometimes heard classmates whisper about those headlines, turning her mother's career ups and downs into casual gossip. It stung, but she learned to keep her composure, giving small smiles and walking away rather than defending what could not be explained. At home, she saw her mother's quiet strength. Bette would come back from press tours, hang up her coat, and ask Sophie about homework as if nothing outside mattered. Those private moments taught Sophie that criticism didn't erase talent and that a family's love could be a shield against the world's noise. Even as a teenager struggling to define herself, she absorbed her mother's lesson. You do not run from harsh words, you outgrow them. In the early 2000s, Sophie made a choice that would shape her future. She left home to study at Yale University, determined to build her own identity, away from the shadow of her mother's fame. Entering those ivy-covered halls, she introduced herself simply as Sophie, not as Bette Midler's daughter, keeping her background private even when classmates eventually recognized her last name. She poured herself into rehearsals, late nights in black, box theaters, and endless pages of scripts, proving her talent through effort rather than legacy. Yet during quiet evenings in her dorm, she often replayed her mother's advice, the stories of facing critics and surviving setbacks. Those phone calls from Bette, filled with humor and honesty, reminded Sophie that failure was part of art, not the end of it. Watching her mother's career weather storms had prepared her for the reality that passion requires endurance. Yale became not just a school, but a testing ground, where Sophie carried forward the resilience she had seen modeled all her life. By the mid to late 2000s, Sophie stepped out of Yale with a degree and the resolve to carve her own path, beginning with small, off-Broadway productions in New York. These were modest stages, far from the glamorous arenas where her mother once performed, but they offered her something invaluable. The chance to prove herself without fanfare. Reviews were mixed at first, some noting her lineage, others praising her nuanced performances, and Sophie quietly absorbed every word. There were nights when audiences were thin and applause felt distant. Yet she refused to quit, recalling the image of Bette Midler returning to the stage after harsh criticism. Those early years were marked by long rehearsals, low budgets, and the sting of comparison. But also by growing confidence, Sophie learned that building a career required patience, and that the weight of a famous name could be transformed into motivation rather than pressure. Each curtain call, no matter how small, was a step forward in proving that her story was her own. From 2011 into the mid-2010s, Sophie began expanding beyond the stage, stepping into film and television, while still holding on to the discipline she learned in theater. In 2014, she appeared in Woody Allen's Irrational Man, a brief role but a signal that her work was reaching wider audiences. Soon after came Equity and other independent projects, each chosen carefully for depth rather than glamour. Some articles inevitably introduced her as Bette Midler's daughter, but Sophie stayed focused, reminding herself of nights watching her mother rebuild after disappointments. Those memories pushed her through long shooting days and the uncertainty of auditions, teaching her that a single role never defines a career. Bette's voice echoed in every decision: pick work you believe in, not just what is offered. Sophie began developing a reputation for subtle, layered performances, proof that talent can stand on its own even when a famous legacy trails behind you. These years became a bridge, connecting her stage roots with a growing on-screen presence. In 2017, Sophie witnessed a defining moment that deepened her own sense of purpose. Bette Midler's triumphant return to Broadway in Hello, Dolly. After years of watching her mother endure criticism and career lulls, Sophie sat in the audience on opening night, eyes fixed on the stage as the crowd erupted in applause. When Bette earned the Tony Award that season, it wasn't just a public victory, but a private lesson Sophie carried deeply. She understood then that a career is not measured by one setback or one success, but by the courage to keep stepping back into the light. Watching her mother bow with tears in her eyes, Sophie felt renewed motivation for her own path. She returned to her projects with sharper focus, fueled by the knowledge that reinvention is possible, that resilience can turn wounds into milestones. That year became a reminder that even in the shadows of great expectations, perseverance can carve out a legacy entirely your own. Between 2018 and 2020, Sophie continued to build her career while also shaping a private life that reflected lessons learned from watching her mother's turbulent journey. She took on new stage roles in smaller New York theaters, experimenting with characters that challenged her range, and quietly accepted film offers that felt meaningful rather than headline. Grabbing reporters occasionally reached out for interviews linking her work to Bette Midler's name. But Sophie declined many requests, determined to keep her focus on craft rather than celebrity. Away from the spotlight, she planned her wedding to Harry J. Guinness, choosing a small, intimate ceremony far removed from the media frenzy she had seen engulf her parents decades earlier. Friends described her as calm and intentional, guarding her personal moments fiercely because she understood how easily fame could erode privacy. These years were not defined by dramatic career leaps, but by steady growth and conscious boundaries, proving that Sophie was charting a life on her own terms while carrying her mother's hard, won wisdom every step of the way, from 2020 through 2023. Sophie faced a world transformed by the pandemic, and the shutdown of theaters could have stalled her progress, yet she adapted quickly, drawing on the resilience she had seen in her mother countless times. When stages went dark and productions were canceled, Sophie turned to online platforms, collaborating with fellow artists to create virtual performances and experimental streaming projects that kept her artistry alive. These efforts were far from glamorous filming in small apartments, editing late at night, but they showed her commitment to storytelling even in isolation. During those uncertain months, she often spoke with Bette by phone, hearing stories of earlier career crises, of tours halted by illness or projects lost to studio decisions, and those conversations gave her the strength to keep creating. As opportunities slowly returned, Sophie stepped back into independent films and small theater events, her name appearing quietly in credits without fanfare. She treated each project as a reminder that longevity in the arts depends not on uninterrupted success, but on the ability to reinvent, to endure, and to keep moving forward no matter how difficult the climate becomes. Now in 2024 and 2025, Sophie von Hasselberg stands as an artist with her own identity, balancing a steady presence in New York's theater scene with selective film projects while maintaining a private family life away from the spotlight. She continues to choose roles that challenge her, often preferring intimate productions and independent scripts over high-profile offers, a decision rooted in watching her mother weather the unpredictable swings of fame. Sophie speaks occasionally at acting workshops and panel discussions, where she shares insights about perseverance and the quiet discipline behind every performance, always careful not to let her legacy overshadow her message. When she reflects on her journey, she often recalls Bette Midler's hardest years, the harsh reviews, the long nights of doubt, and the eventual comeback that proved nothing is final in show business. Those memories serve as a compass, guiding Sophie to build a career that values substance over noise. Her life now is proof that even under the shadow of immense fame, a person can carve a distinct path, shaped but not defined by the dramas and triumphs that came before one child. One who carried the spark forward. She lived her own version of what it meant to be her mother's daughter, not just by blood, but by the weight of expectation and the lessons of resilience. Her mother gave the world unforgettable songs and moments on stage. Sophie gave her something quieter: continuity, protection, and a future built from everything the spotlight never showed. If you found this story meaningful and want more deep dives into the hidden lives behind America's most iconic families, subscribe to Legacy Uncovered. Your support helps bring the forgotten side of fame to light. Thanks for listening.